The restaurant looked like a dream from the outside. Floor-to-ceiling glass windows reflected the morning sun, and polished brass letters spelled out its name with quiet elegance. Inside, soft jazz played, mingling with the gentle clatter of cutlery and the low murmur of conversations. For many, it was just another fine dining spot. For Ethan Drake, tonight was meant to be a turning point. Ethan adjusted his cufflinks nervously. The tailored suit felt tighter than usual, not physically, but in a way that reminded him of the walls he had built around himself. From the waist up, he looked like any successful businessman, confident, composed, untouchable. But below, the wheelchair made him painfully aware of his new reality. His legs didn't respond the way they once did. Small gestures, like crossing his legs or standing to greet someone, were now impossible. The accident had changed everything, and tonight, he feared it might define him. His friends had insisted on this blind date. "You deserve someone who sees you, Ethan," they'd said, with a mixture of sympathy and urgency. He wanted to believe it, wanted to feel that spark again. But as he wheeled toward the restaurant entrance, doubt crept in like a shadow. What if she only sees the chair? What if she only sees the money? The hostess greeted him with a polite smile that didn't reach her eyes. Ethan could feel the flicker of curiosity, the unspoken judgment as she glanced at his wheelchair. He forced a smile, reminding himself that confidence was as much about perception as it was about reality. Then he saw her, Isabella. She sat at a corner table, sunlight catching her hair in golden strands. She looked effortless, laughing with a friend who had just left, tilting her glass with an air of charm that seemed rehearsed. Ethan's heart quickened, hope stirring like a fragile ember. Maybe, just maybe, tonight wouldn't be just another reminder of what he had lost. But as he approached, her laughter faltered. Her eyes swept over him, taking in the wheelchair, the careful posture, the expensive suit, and something sharp flickered across her expression. Not exactly disdain, but a mix of curiosity and something else. Ethan swallowed hard. He smiled, introduced himself, and extended a hand. She looked at it for a moment too long, then offered a delicate, almost mechanical handshake. "Nice to meet you," she said, voice melodic but clipped. "I wasn't sure if you'd be able to make it." The words cut sharper than he expected. Not cruel, not exactly, but layered with a subtle judgment that made him flinch. Ethan's fingers tightened slightly on the armrest of his chair. He forced a calm laugh. "It's been manageable," he replied, keeping his voice steady. Manageable. The word sounded weaker in his mind than it did aloud. Dinner began. The menu was extensive, but Ethan's focus wasn't on the food. It was on maintaining composure. Every glance, every murmur from nearby tables seemed amplified. Every whispered, "Oh, look," from strangers made his skin crawl. Isabella, meanwhile, sipped her wine with a practiced grace, occasionally glancing at him with a teasing smile that didn't quite reach her eyes. Then came the first jab. "You know," she said lightly, "it must be interesting, going out like this. I mean, you can't just stand up whenever you feel like it." Ethan froze for a moment. His inner voice flared, a mix of anger and shame. "Interesting? Really? That's the best you could come up with?" He smiled politely, but the tightness in his jaw betrayed him. "It has its limitations," he admitted, voice calm but firm. "But I manage." She laughed softly, the kind of laugh that feels like it's directed at you and not with you. "Manage, huh? I guess I'd find that challenging." Nearby diners glanced over, some with curious expressions, others with barely concealed amusement. Ethan felt a flush of heat, a familiar sting that had nothing to do with embarrassment alone. It was humiliation. He wasn't used to being the center of pity, of quiet judgment. He had spent his life mastering appearances, commanding respect, yet here, in this restaurant, his control felt fragile, slipping like sand through his fingers. He tried to redirect the conversation, asking about her life, her work, anything to bridge the growing chasm between them. But every attempt was met with a polite nod or a sharp, dismissive remark, as if she were testing the limits of his composure. Each word she spoke felt like a small weight pressing down, reminding him of the gap between the life he used to lead and the reality he now faced. And yet, amidst the tension, he noticed a quiet presence. A waitress moved through the tables with effortless grace, her eyes occasionally flicking toward him, not with pity, not with curiosity, but with something warmer, observant, compassionate. There was a steadiness to her gaze that almost made him forget the laughter that had stung just moments ago. As the main course arrived, Isabella made another comment, this time about how limited his menu choices must feel. Ethan's hand trembled slightly as he reached for his fork. His pride bristled, his chest tight with a mix of frustration and helplessness. He opened his mouth, ready to respond, when the waitress appeared silently beside him, offering a small, reassuring smile. She didn't speak. She didn't interfere. She simply placed a glass of water within reach and adjusted a napkin on the table with a subtle gesture that said more than words could. Ethan caught her eye briefly, and for a fleeting second, he felt seen. Not for his wealth, not for his status, but for him, Ethan, the man behind the wheelchair, the man who had been humiliated before this table, and perhaps countless others. Isabella noticed it too, her smirk tightening ever so slightly, as if sensing a shift she didn't understand. Her laughter died down, replaced by a watchful, calculating silence. Ethan's thoughts raced. Who is she? Why does this small gesture matter so much? The simple act of kindness sparked a flicker of hope, yet the tension in the air remained thick, almost suffocating. He realized then that tonight would not be just a date. It would be a test, not of his wealth, not of his charm, but of his patience, his dignity, and his ability to reclaim control of a situation that seemed designed to break him. He took a deep breath, trying to steady himself. Isabella's eyes followed every movement, sharp and calculating. The restaurant's hum seemed to fade into silence, leaving only the sharp tension of unspoken challenges. Ethan knew the night was far from over, and that somewhere in this room, a small gesture had already begun to change everything. And that's when the first real twist of the evening waited, just out of reach, a storm of emotion, humiliation, and unexpected courage ready to strike. The air in the restaurant felt heavier now, charged with tension that hung like smoke. Ethan Drake sat quietly in his wheelchair, fingers resting lightly on the polished wood table, trying to steady his racing heart. Isabella's eyes were sharp, calculating, and her smile no longer carried charm. It was a weapon, subtle but cutting. Every movement felt scrutinized. Every word he spoke seemed weighed, measured, and dissected. The hum of conversations and clinking silverware faded into a background murmur. Ethan felt exposed, raw, vulnerable, and yet, amid the anxiety, something unexpected caught his attention. A waitress! She moved with quiet confidence through the tables, carrying plates and glasses with a graceful ease. But it wasn't her skill that made Ethan pause. It was the way she looked at him. Observant, calm, warm. She didn't look at the wheelchair. She didn't look at the money. She looked at him. Just him. As Isabella made another remark about his limited lifestyle, Ethan felt the familiar heat of embarrassment creeping up his neck. He shifted slightly, a small tremor running through his hand as he reached for his glass. The wine wobbled dangerously, and that's when she acted. The waitress, Mia, as he would later learn, stepped closer without a word. Her fingers gently adjusted the glass, steadying it, her touch light, careful, yet full of intent. A soft smile accompanied the gesture, subtle enough for the surrounding tables to ignore, but powerful enough to speak directly to him. Ethan's heart skipped. For the first time that evening, he felt acknowledged, not mocked, not pitied, but seen. He looked up at Isabella, hoping for some recognition of his regained composure, but instead, her eyes narrowed. Her lips twitched with a smirk, as if she noticed the shift she couldn't understand. Who is she? Ethan's thoughts raced. Why does this simple gesture feel like a lifeline? He tried to focus on his breath, inhaling slowly, grounding himself. The wine glass was steady now, thanks to her. A small act, seemingly insignificant, but it ignited something in him. A spark. A reminder that dignity isn't something others grant you. It's something you claim, piece by piece, moment by moment. Mia didn't stop there. She leaned slightly closer, whispering softly, just enough for him to hear over the low murmur of the restaurant. "You're handling this well." Ethan blinked. His chest tightened, not from exhaustion, but from an unexpected surge of gratitude and relief. Handling it well. Not perfect. Not flawlessly. Just well. Enough to matter. He gave a faint nod, a silent acknowledgement. She returned it with another small, reassuring smile and moved on, blending into the rhythm of the restaurant. For a moment, Ethan felt a strange kind of power returning. It wasn't financial or social, it was emotional. The knowledge that someone understood his struggle, even in the quietest way, gave him strength he hadn't realized he'd lost. Isabella, however, wasn't done. She leaned slightly forward, her tone dropping to a lower, more mocking pitch. "Interesting," she said, tracing the rim of her wine glass with a manicured finger. "How someone like you relies on others for the tiniest things." Ethan felt the words slice through him, but this time, he didn't flinch. He remembered Mia's gesture, the quiet encouragement, the simple act that reminded him of his worth beyond appearances. "I may have some help," Ethan replied evenly, voice steady, "but it doesn't define me. It doesn't limit me." The pause that followed was electric. Isabella blinked, taken aback by the calm certainty in his tone. For the first time, she seemed to hesitate, a crack appearing in her composed facade. Ethan noticed it and felt a flicker of something he hadn't allowed himself in months. Pride. Not arrogance, not wealth, not power, but the pride of reclaiming his dignity, of holding his ground when the world seemed ready to humiliate him. Yet, the tension didn't dissipate entirely. The restaurant was still full of curious eyes, subtle whispers brushing against the edges of his awareness. The air thrummed with the unspoken question, who is this man, really? And why is he sitting there unbroken? Mia returned, carrying a small dessert plate. Her movements were precise, but she paused just behind Isabella's chair, setting the plate in front of Ethan with another quiet nod. It was almost ceremonial, her gesture a shield, a line drawn against humiliation. Ethan felt a lump in his throat. He wanted to thank her, but words felt unnecessary. She had said enough. Sometimes, the right action is louder than 1,000 words. The dinner continued, but the dynamic had subtly shifted. Isabella's smirk no longer held its previous confidence. Her comments became more guarded, less sharp. Ethan's confidence grew quietly, silently, fueled by the unseen support from the waitress who had refused to let the evening define him by humiliation. He realized something profound in that moment. True strength isn't measured by wealth, by appearances, or by the ability to command attention. It's measured by resilience, the courage to stand tall when others try to push you down. And sometimes, all it takes is one unexpected act of kindness to remind you that you're not alone in the fight. But the night was far from over. Ethan knew that Isabella's pride wouldn't let her back down so easily. Her next move was uncertain, and the atmosphere in the restaurant held a silent tension, as if anticipating the storm that might come. Ethan's eyes met Mia's one last time before she moved away. In that brief glance, there was understanding, reassurance, and a promise. You're not alone. And just like that, the small gesture had shifted the entire course of the evening. Ethan felt a cautious hope stirring in his chest, a fragile flame he hadn't known he could trust again. Yet, in the back of his mind, the voice of caution whispered, this is just the beginning. The real challenge is yet to come. The restaurant seemed to hold its breath, caught between the fragile calm and the storm of humiliation that still lingered on the horizon. Ethan leaned back slightly in his chair, gripping the armrests with steady hands, feeling more prepared than he had in months, but fully aware that the night had only just begun. Somewhere, in the shadows of the restaurant's corners, Isabella's smirk lingered, a quiet promise that she wouldn't let the night end on anyone else's terms. And Ethan understood, with a sinking certainty, that Mia's gesture, so small, so quiet, was about to become the turning point in a night that would change everything. The restaurant had quieted slightly after the brief, almost imperceptible shift in dynamics. Ethan Drake felt it, the subtle change in energy, the way Isabella's confidence had faltered, even if just a little. But he also knew better than to let his guard down. Pride, after all, could be cruel, and humiliation had a way of creeping back when you least expected it. Isabella leaned back in her chair, crossing one leg with a practiced elegance. Her eyes, sharp and calculating, followed Ethan's every movement. The sparkle of her wine glass caught the afternoon light, a distraction she wielded like a weapon. "You know," she said, her tone deceptively light, "I almost admire how calm you are, for someone who depends on others for the smallest things." Ethan felt the words hit like a cold gust. Nearby diners glanced over, some with curiosity, others with barely concealed amusement. A faint murmur of attention seemed to ripple through the room. Every head turned toward them, every eye a silent judge. His hands clenched lightly on the armrests of his wheelchair. The familiar sting of humiliation returned, sharp and relentless. But this time, he remembered the quiet encouragement of Mia, the waitress. Her subtle gestures, steadying the glass, offering a reassuring smile, had reminded him of something he'd forgotten in months of struggle. Dignity wasn't about appearances. It was about holding your ground, even when the world tried to tear you down. Ethan met Isabella's gaze steadily. "I may need help with some things," he said calmly, voice controlled. "But that doesn't define my strength. And it doesn't define who I am." The room fell into an almost imperceptible hush. Isabella's lips pressed together, her smirk faltering. For a moment, the illusion of her superiority cracked, revealing something vulnerable beneath. But she wasn't finished. "Oh, come on," she said, leaning forward, her voice dripping with mock sweetness. "You can't seriously expect me, or anyone else, to take this seriously. People look at you and, well," her hand gestured vaguely toward his wheelchair, a thinly veiled dismissal. Ethan felt a surge of anger, hot and immediate, but he didn't let it show. Instead, he drew a slow breath, letting it ground him. Inside, his mind raced, but his outward demeanor remained calm, collected. "This is not the moment to lose control," he reminded himself. "This is the moment to show them who I really am." He leaned slightly forward, speaking with quiet authority. "You may see only what's visible to you, but there's more to me than what meets the eye. And tonight, I'm not here to prove anything to you. I'm here to be myself." The words hung in the air like a challenge, subtle but unshakable. Ethan noticed a shift in the room. A few diners turned back to their meals, while others stole glances, curiosity etched on their faces. The tension thickened, almost tangible, wrapping around the table like a living thing. Then, Isabella's smirk returned, but this time, it was sharper, more dangerous. "Is that so?" she asked, leaning closer, lowering her voice. "I wonder how well you'll hold up when things get interesting." Ethan felt his stomach tighten. He knew she was trying to provoke him, to strip away the composure he had fought so hard to reclaim. But the quiet memory of Mia's gestures, the small acts of support, the unspoken solidarity, anchored him. At that moment, a minor accident occurred. A waiter stumbled nearby, spilling a tray of glasses with a loud crash. Wine splashed across the polished floor, sending a ripple of shock through the restaurant. Some heads turned in surprise. Others whispered behind cupped hands. Ethan's heart leapt as a glass teetered dangerously close to his chair. In that split second, instinct took over. He reached forward, but his hand trembled, and he knew he couldn't stop it alone. Then, without hesitation, Mia was there. Her hand steadied the chair, her presence calm and unwavering. She caught the glass mid-fall with perfect timing, setting it safely aside. Her eyes met Ethan's for a brief moment, and in them, he saw affirmation, courage, and an unspoken message. "You're not alone. You can face this." The restaurant's tension seemed to shift. Gasps of surprise and admiration rippled through the tables nearby. Ethan realized something profound. He wasn't defined by the accident, by the chair, or by Isabella's cruel words. Strength, real strength, came from resilience and from the quiet, unexpected allies who remind you of your worth. Ethan straightened in his wheelchair, a newfound determination settling into his chest. Isabella's lips parted, a flicker of shock crossing her face. She hadn't expected him to recover so quickly, to handle the situation with composure and dignity. "You handled that well," she muttered, almost begrudgingly. Ethan's eyes narrowed slightly, not with anger, but with resolve. "I always do," he replied softly, his voice steady. "Not because I have to. Not because I'm trying to impress anyone, but because I refuse to let anyone define me or humiliate me without reason." For a fleeting moment, Isabella looked as though she might retreat, but pride held her rooted in place. She didn't leave. Instead, her expression hardened, a silent promise that the night's battle wasn't over. Ethan's gaze drifted to Mia again. She offered a small, almost imperceptible nod, her presence a quiet shield against the storm of humiliation. That single gesture reminded him that even in the harshest moments, courage could emerge, not just from within, but from unexpected sources of support. Yet the night's tension remained unresolved. Isabella's eyes glinted with a quiet fire, suggesting she would not surrender so easily. Ethan felt the weight of her scrutiny, but now it stirred something different inside him. Determination, resilience, and the quiet confidence that no matter how sharp her words, he would not crumble. The room seemed to hold its breath. Ethan knew the next moments would be crucial, not just for his pride, but for the quiet dignity he had fought to reclaim. Every glance, every word, every gesture mattered. As the wine settled in his glass and the restaurant returned to its ambient rhythm, Ethan realized one thing clearly. This was not just a blind date. It was a test of character, courage, and inner strength. And thanks to one quiet, unwavering gesture from the waitress, he was beginning to pass it. But the storm wasn't over. Isabella's final move was yet to come, and the tension lingering in the air promised a twist that could either break the fragile peace or elevate Ethan to a place he hadn't known he could reach. The quiet hum of the restaurant masked the undercurrent of suspense. Ethan gripped the armrests of his wheelchair, steadying himself. He felt the weight of the evening pressing down, but for the first time, he also felt prepared to face whatever came next. And somewhere, just beyond his peripheral vision, Isabella's gaze lingered, calculating, unpredictable, and far from defeated. Ethan knew, with a sinking certainty, that the real challenge had only just begun. The restaurant had quieted now, the earlier tension still lingering like a shadow over the polished floors. Ethan Drake sat in his wheelchair, chest rising and falling steadily, though his heart still thumped with the adrenaline of the confrontation. Isabella had temporarily backed off, her smirk replaced by a cold calculation, leaving a strange calm hanging in the air. It was in this quiet that Mia, the waitress who had quietly become his unexpected anchor, approached again. This time, she wasn't delivering food or drinks. She paused beside his chair, folding her hands politely, her eyes meeting his with a warmth that cut through the day's tension. "You handled that really well," she said softly, her voice almost a whisper. Ethan blinked, his chest tightening. I didn't know I could," he admitted, the words spilling out unguarded. He felt an unfamiliar vulnerability settling over him, and for the first time in months, he didn't try to hide it. Mia smiled gently, a quiet encouragement. "You're stronger than you think. Most people would've crumbled." Her words lingered in the air. Ethan felt a mixture of relief and disbelief. Why does it matter so much what she thinks? He wondered. Yet it did. More than anyone else tonight, Mia's acknowledgement made him feel human again. For a moment, they simply sat in silence, the ambient hum of the restaurant fading into the background. Ethan's mind replayed the events of the evening, the humiliating comments, the sharp glances, the constant scrutiny. And then, her small gestures, the steadying of the glass, the reassuring nods, the simple presence that had reminded him he wasn't alone. He found himself speaking, almost reflexively, his voice low but sincere. "I used to think my wealth made me untouchable, that it could protect me from anything. Humiliation, rejection, loneliness. I was wrong. None of that matters when people see you as less than." Mia listened intently, nodding once, her eyes filled with empathy. "It's not easy," she said softly, "to be strong in the face of people who don't understand. But sometimes, the smallest gestures, yours or someone else's, can change everything." Ethan felt a lump form in his throat. He wanted to explain, to share the depth of the loneliness, the fear, and the shame he carried since the accident, but words seemed inadequate. Instead, he let himself be silent, letting the weight of his emotions show, just for a moment. Mia didn't flinch. She didn't judge. She simply stayed there, a calm presence, giving him space to be vulnerable without fear. And in that quiet, something shifted inside Ethan. The tension, the humiliation, the fear of judgment, it all began to lose its grip. He finally spoke again, his voice quieter, more introspective. I. I haven't felt seen in a long time. Not really. People notice the chair, the wealth, the image, but no one sees the man behind it all. And tonight, somehow, your gesture reminded me that I still exist beyond all that. Mia's gaze softened. Sometimes all it takes is one person to see the real you. That's enough to remind you that strength isn't just in standing or walking, it's in facing the world, no matter what it throws at you. Ethan let out a slow breath, a mixture of relief and tentative hope. I've spent so much time hiding, pretending, afraid of being judged, humiliated, even by people who should care. Tonight, I finally feel like I can breathe again. The small intimacy of the moment, the quiet connection without words, the vulnerability shared across a simple gesture, filled Ethan with a strange, overwhelming warmth. For the first time, he felt less like a man defined by tragedy and more like a man capable of resilience, of connection, of hope. But the night wasn't over. A distant clatter from across the restaurant caught his attention. Isabella, always watching, always calculating. Ethan realized with a sinking certainty that she had noticed the subtle bond forming between him and Mia. Her eyes flicked toward them, narrowing ever so slightly, a storm of emotions behind her composed mask. Ethan felt the tension return, sharper this time, like a coil tightening in his chest. He knew Isabella would not let the evening end quietly, not when she had invested so much of her ego in breaking him down. But he also knew he was no longer the same man she had tried to humiliate just hours ago. He glanced at Mia, who offered a reassuring nod, almost imperceptible. Her presence reminded him that courage could be quiet but unshakable, that strength could emerge not in isolation, but in connection with someone who believed in you, even silently. Ethan's mind raced. The next moment will define everything. How I respond, how I stand, how I let her actions affect me, will determine the rest of this night. He straightened slightly, gripping the armrests of his wheelchair with a newfound resolve. His eyes met Isabella's across the table. She smirked faintly, confident, sharp, dangerous, but he saw past it now. Past the cruelty, past the condescension. He could face it, and he would. The restaurant seemed to pause, the subtle tension of impending confrontation hovering in the air. Every patron was caught in the quiet storm, unaware of the emotional battle playing out at the corner table. Ethan's thoughts flickered briefly to the gesture that had sparked this shift, the small, quiet act by Mia that reminded him of his worth. He realized then that even in vulnerability, in moments of exposure and weakness, there was power, true power, and the night had only just begun to reveal it. As he prepared for what was to come, Ethan felt the strange mixture of fear and anticipation that precedes a turning point. He knew the next confrontation would test him, not just his dignity, but his courage, his patience, and his ability to embrace vulnerability without shame. The connection with Mia, fragile yet profound, offered a lifeline in the midst of uncertainty. And as Isabella's gaze lingered like a shadow across the table, Ethan knew one thing with clarity. The next moments would reveal not just the strength of his character, but the depth of his humanity. And somewhere, in the quiet tension of the room, he sensed the storm approaching, the climax of the night, where humiliation, courage, and unexpected connection would collide. Ethan's fingers tightened on the armrests. His heart pounded. But this time, he felt ready. Not because he was unafraid, but because he had been reminded that even in the face of judgment and cruelty, connection could restore the strength that loneliness had tried to steal. The silence of the restaurant, the weight of expectation, and the unseen eyes all converged in one electric moment. Ethan understood that the night's true test was only just beginning, and that the choices he made in the coming minutes would shape everything that followed. The restaurant felt different now. The earlier tension, thick and suffocating, had not vanished, but it had transformed. Ethan Drake sat in his wheelchair with a calm certainty, a quiet power settling into his chest. He had faced humiliation, exposure, and judgment, and yet he remained unbroken. Isabella's presence across the table still loomed like a storm cloud. Her eyes flicked toward him, sharp and calculating, as if searching for cracks in the composure he had reclaimed. But tonight, there were none to find. The humiliation she had wielded so easily earlier had lost its edge. Ethan's gaze shifted subtly to Mia, the waitress who had become the silent hero of this evening. She stood nearby, carrying plates with her usual grace, but it was her steady, reassuring presence that spoke volumes. That single gesture, so quiet, so deliberate, had ignited a strength within him that no ridicule could extinguish. Then Isabella made her move. She leaned slightly forward, her voice dropping to a dangerous, mocking whisper. "Don't think this ends tonight," she said, her words slicing the air. "People like you, they can't hide behind money or manners forever." Ethan's hands gripped the armrests of his wheelchair, steady but tense. He felt the old sting of fear, the old pressure to retreat. But he remembered Mia's gestures, the small, unwavering acts of support, and something shifted inside him. "You're right about one thing," he said calmly, meeting her gaze. "I won't hide, but I also won't let anyone define me. Not tonight. Not ever." The room seemed to hold its breath. Isabella's lips pressed into a thin line, her smirk faltering as she realized her words no longer carried the same weight. The diners, previously caught in whispered curiosity, now watched silently, sensing the change in dynamic. Mia approached again, this time quietly placing a small dessert in front of Ethan. The gesture was simple, almost mundane, but its impact was profound. It reminded him that support doesn't need to be loud to be powerful. It doesn't need to be public to matter. Ethan looked at Mia, gratitude and emotion mixing in his eyes. "Thank you," he whispered, barely audible, but sincere. She smiled softly, nodding just once. No words were needed. In that moment, a quiet bond was forged, one that transcended social status, physical limitations, and even the humiliation of the evening. Isabella's frustration was visible now. Her eyes darted between them, confusion and irritation warring on her face. For the first time, she realized that her attempts to humiliate him had failed, and in fact, had only highlighted his dignity. Ethan leaned slightly forward in his wheelchair, voice steady and measured, the calm authority of a man reclaiming himself resonating in every word. "Strength isn't about proving something to others," he said. "It's about staying true to yourself, even when the world doubts you. And kindness, even the smallest acts of it, can change everything." A murmur of quiet approval rippled through the nearby tables. Some diners exchanged glances, impressed by the quiet power emanating from Ethan. Isabella's expression hardened, but the fire in her eyes was now laced with recognition. She had underestimated him, and she knew it. The night moved on, but Ethan's triumph was quiet, internal. He had faced the storm, endured judgment, and maintained his dignity. And in the process, he had discovered something unexpected: connection. In Mia's gestures, he had found not just support, but empathy, understanding, and a reminder that humanity matters more than wealth, status, or appearances. As the evening wound down, Ethan and Mia shared a quiet moment. Their eyes met across the table, a simple, lingering glance that spoke of mutual respect and the possibility of something more. An unspoken acknowledgement of the bond formed in the quiet crucible of challenge and courage. The restaurant's ambient noise resumed, soft conversations and the gentle clatter of dishes filling the air. Yet, Ethan felt a profound sense of peace. He realized that humiliation, judgment, and even fear could not diminish his worth. What truly mattered were the connections we make, the courage we find, and the quiet gestures that remind us we are seen. But even in this moment of victory, suspense lingered. Isabella had not completely retreated. Her eyes, sharp and calculating, hinted at unresolved tension. The potential for conflict remained, a subtle reminder that life's challenges never fully vanish, they only transform. Ethan allowed himself a small, confident smile. The stakes of the evening had been high, but he had emerged not just unbroken, but stronger, more self-assured, and more aware of the value of kindness. He thought briefly of the lessons learned, that dignity cannot be stolen by mockery, that courage can be quiet yet profound, and that sometimes a simple gesture can change the course of everything. As he prepared to leave the restaurant, he glanced one last time at Mia. She met his gaze with a smile that conveyed understanding, respect, and a quiet encouragement for the future. And in that smile, Ethan saw hope, hope that even in the harshest circumstances, strength and connection could prevail. And then, as the scene slowly fades, the narrator's voice draws the story to its cinematic conclusion. Sometimes, the world will try to humiliate you. Sometimes, the people around you will doubt your strength. But it only takes one small act, a gesture, a word, a smile, to change everything. For Ethan, that gesture came at the perfect moment. And tonight, he learned that dignity, courage, and connection matter more than wealth, more than appearances, more than anything. The camera lingers on Ethan, poised, dignified, and quietly triumphant, his gaze reflecting resilience and newfound hope. The soft clink of glasses and muted conversation provide the perfect backdrop to the emotional climax. And as the night ends, one thing is clear. True strength is not measured by what you have, but by who you are, and by the gestures that remind you of your worth. If Ethan's story touched you, if it reminded you of the power of courage and kindness, make sure to like, comment, and subscribe, because stories like these deserve to be shared. Even as the credits of this chapter begin to roll, a lingering sense of suspense remains. Isabella's gaze in the background, subtle yet charged, promises that life's challenges and surprises are never truly over, only waiting for the next moment to arrive.